Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video we're heading on down to Georgia to talk about Tex. Real name Claude, yeah, I'd go with Tex too. He was a very wealthy, prominent attorney in Atlanta, and one day he had an accident. People say, you know, like in this one, here, listen lads, accidents happen all the time, right? Though in this one you'd have to go pretty darn far out of your way to make an accident like this happen in the backseat of your car. Let's give it a go, you and I, come on. On the 25th of September 2016, 'twas a Sunday, 73-year-old Tex McIver, his wife of 11 years, 64-year-old Diane, and Diane's longtime best friend, Danny Joe Carter, all three of them were heading for a bit of grub at a steakhouse in Atlanta. Earlier that day, the three of them had spent, well, the day, at the McIver Ranch in Putnam County. Played, you know, a bit of the old, golf, and they were driving from there to the McIver's luxurious condo in Buckhead, Atlanta, when they decided to go for some grub. After wolfing it down, they continued on their way through the city. Danny Joe Carter, she was driving, Diane McIver was sitting in the passenger seat, and directly behind her was Tex. And this really brought them to the route, as they drove along the route of this case. Traffic's a bitch. And it definitely was on the evening of the 25th of September. So, bumper to bumper, they were like, here, alright, we need to get another way to Buckhead or else we won't get home at all. So they got off the interstate, and Tex, after having a few glug-lugs, bit of the adult grape juice, he was falling asleep in the back seat. They took an off-ramp, Tex woke up, and then they started driving through a dodgy neighborhood. It was at that point that Tex, peeking out the window, his gears were grinding thinking it was a bad idea, and he asked Diane for his gun that he kept in the car. It was in a plastic bag in the center console. The gun was a .38 special. I don't know much about guns, but this seems like a good one. I don't know. He was shitting himself. He was worried they would get carjacked or whatever, so he was locked and loaded. As they kept driving, they got near Piedmont Park, and Tex started dozing off again. The car then came to a stop, and Tex was jolted awake by a gunshot. The gunshot came from the gun that was in his hand. The bullet went right through the seat in front of him, and straight into his wife, Diane. Diane was rushed to hospital, and died early the next day. So, that's what happened. Tex's version of it anyway. Tex and Diane had been together for 16 years, married for 11, and were very happily married. Inseparable, according to those that knew them. They lived in their condo in Buckhead, and they had a ranch also where they would throw parties for the rich Atlanteans on the reg. Tex, Claude, originally from Texas, wow, original nickname. He was a very well-connected lawyer in Atlanta. He did mainly business law, mainly defending companies against unions, so I'm sure he lined his pockets fairly well. He was also on the state's election board. He rubbed shoulders with with politicians and with businessmen, so make of that what you will. He had been married before, which ended in an expensive divorce, and he had 3 children. Diane, she grew up in Alabama, and she also had been married once before, with no children. She was known to be tough as nails, generous, and she would go on to run the company that she started answering phones at, US Enterprises, a real estate company. You know, we talk about life insurances, people having affairs, and that's usually kind of the basis of the case, which is all well and good. But this one, I just can't wrap my head around it at all. If any of you guys remember the case of Todd Kendhammer, very similar to that one. It's a toughie, although this one is tougher than that one. See, Tex and Diane, they were both wealthy in their own right. There was no other people outside of their marriage, let's say. They kept their finances separate, and they didn't need each other's money. They both had good, high-paying jobs. Or did they? So what happened to Diane seemed like a tragic accident, right? And that's what Tex's defenders would say, even to this day. It was just an accident, the gun just went off, you know? Shit happens. He never meant to kill his wife, he just did. 2 days after Diane's death, Tex and his lawyer met with Atlanta police detectives to go through the events of what happened.
Daniel was driving, right? Okay. I was in the backseat. In the backseat, okay. And what's the next thing that you can, I know you said you kind of fell asleep there, what's the next thing that you can remember from there?
Despite the fact I was tired, I don't sleep well in cars, just the motion and so on. So it's kind of a twilight zone thing for me. But we went through an area I thought that was particularly dangerous at night. And I quickly said, this is a big mistake, we're in a place that we don't belong.
Right.
I said, yeah, I'd like to, if you don't mind, please hand me my contract. It was in the center console. Yes, I just lay back again and went to sleep. Danny Joe came to a stop, and anyway, I just was handling the gun. And I realized it was in my lap, right, and it went off.
What do you remember after the gun was off?
It was a shock. I immediately called out. I said, is everybody all right? And Danny Joe said yes. Diane's head was kind of slanted. She said, I've been shot, words to that effect. She said, your wife's in bad shape, but she's responsive. And this doctor said, she said it was an accident.
And that's when, as the investigation began, things started to become a little muddier. Was this an accident? Was it though? I mean, did he just jolt awake and pull the trigger, or did he intentionally go? For one thing, after the shooting, when still in the car, Tex demanded Danny Joe Carter drive to Emory University Hospital.
I made a judgment that Emory was the closest hospital. Danny Joe driving with me, telling her to go fast.
There were 3 hospitals in downtown Atlanta much closer to where they were, including one of the best trauma hospitals. So that's one eyebrow-raising part. Was he, maybe kind of hoping she would, bleed out? That's why he wanted to go to the hospital that was furthest away? Second, the gun was still in the bag when it went off, which is kind of odd. It's just, I don't know how do you even kind of wrap your hand around it, let's say. And Tex was in the military.
You ever taken any, safety classes or anything like that?
No, I was in the military.
Okay. Served in Vietnam, alright.
Correct.
You think he'd know his way around guns, and you'd think that he'd know, maybe keeping your finger on the trigger, probably not a good idea. Or keeping it just in your hand while you're falling asleep in a moving vehicle is probably not a good idea. I don't know anything about guns, but I think even I know that. So then, as the days, weeks, and months progressed after the 25th of September, Tex would do some more things that would raise eyebrows, raise them even more than they were already raised. Things that would lead to Tex getting charged with murder. So, from the get-go, this was a big story. Tex, Diane, they were big players, rich folk. People wanted to know what had happened and why it had happened. Things then, really went into overdrive. When, a couple of days after the murder, a spokesperson for Tex told the media that the reason he had the gun in his hand in the first place, why it wasn't just left, in the console, the reason he had it out was because Tex was afraid they were driving close to a Black Lives Matter rally. Yeah. As you can imagine, that gave the case another spin. Now, Tex's attorney would come out and say, oh, Tex never said that, his spokesperson talking out of his arse. Shite talking. But, 2 months later, as the investigation was still ongoing, Tex started selling off Diane's expensive jewelry, clothing, furs, all that shit. Danny Jo Carter, the sole witness, would later change up her story a little.
There's not a doubt in my mind that it was completely one of the most horrible accidents.
Maybe Tex wasn't as innocent as it first appeared.
He's not been nice to me and tried to manipulate me. He tried to get me to lie, supposedly to protect me from getting all wrapped up in this.
He had been telling her to lie to the investigators about what really happened. Tex's attorneys would just say he was trying to protect her, get her to lie so the media wouldn't go after her. But when he left this voicemail for her...
Let me just be plain. Danny is about to send me to prison. Please erase this voicemail message, but call me right away. Y'all have no idea the problem this is causing. It's innocent, but it's absolutely nuclear for me.
It didn't look good, regardless.
CBS 46 takes another in-depth look at today's big story. Criminal charges filed against the Atlanta man who says he accidentally killed his wife. Tex McIver is accused of involuntary manslaughter and reckless conduct.
In December 2016, the Atlanta Police Department finished their investigation and came out and said the shooting was not intentional. Tex was charged with involuntary manslaughter and reckless conduct. He more or less immediately bonded out of jail. So the police closed their case, and the district attorney opened theirs. They didn't believe this was no accident. And then it came out that Tex owed his wife, his now dead wife, $350,000. Now Tex would come out and say, here, come on, it wasn't like a loan, it was just a tax thing, you know, just moving money around, etc., etc. But it didn't exactly look like just a tax thing on paper, at least. It also looked like Tex was a lot more broke than anyone knew. It seemed that in September 2016 he was deep in the shit, deep in debt. He had lost his position as a partner at the law firm he worked at, and his salary had been cut in half. Yet he was still spending like there was no tomorrow. He was burning a hole in his pocket. In an email to his wife 3 months before her death, he wrote, "I am seriously trying to reduce my monthly expenses. Debt is my biggest obstacle right now. Plan on hitting the lotto sometime this week. Aren't we all?" So things were kind of looking a little bit worse and worse for old Tex. And then the prosecution got wind that Diane may have had a second will, one Tex was hiding. See, the ranch that they both owned out in Putnam County, it was owned both by Diane and Tex. And Diane had said in her will that she wanted her half of that ranch to go to her godchild. Maybe there was a second will. Maybe Tex was updating it. So the district attorney's office would subpoena, all their records. They want to have a go at them. And then they did a search of the condo that Tex was staying in while he was out on bond. And in the condo, well, they never found a secret will. Never found one. But what they did find was a gun. That was a violation of the terms of his bond. Now, Tex would say the place had been searched before and there was no gun ever found there. He had no gun in that condo. He'd gotten rid of all his guns. So it had to have been planted there. It was Diane's gun. And it was in his sock drawer. So it's not like he wouldn't have known about it, I guess. But the judge wasn't having it.
Given where it was found, its provenance, I find very readily that Mr. McIver possessed the gun. I find that Mr. McIver has violated a central provision of his bond. He possessed a firearm.
And it was then that Tex was charged with murder.
Tex McIver appeared in court, full beard now. Investigators say that he shot and killed his wife.
Tex McIver is not only accused of killing his wife, Diane, he's also accused of trying to influence a witness to keep her mouth shut about what she knows.
My wife and I were the two closest people in the world. I wish today she'd walk in this room. I do. All I do, I cry every day and I miss her every day. And for people to think that I murdered her, it's just, I just don't have words to respond to that.
So, did he or didn't he? Well, he did. But did he mean to?
On September 25th, 2016, the day that the defendant shot his wife in the back, his life was spinning out of control. he had become dependent upon Diane. He received $198,000 from Diane McIver. In addition to the $198,000 that he received from her, she gave him a loan for $350,000 in 2011. And based on his financial condition, the defendant would not be able to repay this loan. The defendant did have a pension, and our expert would testify that based upon his spending habits, it would be depleted in 2 years after he retired. And in addition to that, without the money from Diane that he was receiving every month, on the time of her death, the defendant wouldn't even have $1. Somehow the defendant wants you to believe that the death of Diane McIver was an accident. But ladies and gentlemen, this was no accident at all.
We just spent, I think, maybe 30 or 40 minutes listening to the state tell you all their theories and their reasons why they think Mr. McIver intentionally shot Diane McIver. And I want to tell you that you can just set all of that aside. There's really one thing that you need to know about Tex McIver and Diane McIver to know that he did not intentionally shoot his wife, and that is that he loved her. He truly loved her, deeply loved her, and she loved him back.
The trial would go on for 6 weeks, with over 80 witnesses. Even Tex's masseuse would be called up. The prosecution would say the motive for murder was money.
On Diane's death, he went from negative $5,000 to over $1.1 million cash instantly. And he was the executor and one of the beneficiaries of Diane's $7 million estate. The easiest way for him to gain control was to kill Diane. And on Sunday, September 25th, 2016, the evidence will show that that is just what he did.
It was intentional and planned. For instance, leaving a gun in a plastic bag in the car isn't, the safest place to leave it, and it also seemed he had left it there not long before the shooting. It also came out that he had asked someone to drive Danny Jo home earlier that day, as if he didn't want her to be a witness. Staff at the hospital would also say they thought Tex was acting strangely.
I don't remember the totality of the conversation, but I remember him saying, what do I say? What's the plan?
I had the impression that there was a plan being enacted. They were actually kind of huddling like you would think of a sports team.
Danny Jo, who by this stage believed it was intentional, would say no, Tex wasn't in that much of a rush to get to the hospital like he said.
Danny Jo driving with me, telling her to go fast.
He was more like, here, drive casual.
How are you driving the vehicle at this point?
Very quickly. I was running red lights.
And can you tell the jury, all along this route, is the defendant saying anything? Is he talking? What's going on?
Told me I needed to be careful, that there might be people out there walking with baby carriages.
Besides the words, be careful, did he tell you to do anything with your speed?
He may have said, slow down, there may be people out there.
The defense would say he didn't need money, and in fact he would have been better off with her alive. The prosecution at one point called a firearms expert.
If I sit down with it and hold it down here in my lap, will it just go off?
No.
If I handle it like this in any way, will it just go off?
No.
What will make this firearm go off?
Something would have to act on the trigger.
And when you say something has to act on the trigger, what do you mean?
I mean, the trigger has to be pulled rearward.
Who, yikes, actually proved more useful for the defense.
It doesn't touch, because you notice the trigger.
Remember him demonstrating the weapon and pulling the trigger when he testified right here.
You notice the trigger.
Oops. He's demonstrating it for you on the witness stand. He accidentally pulls the trigger. He says, oops.
In the end, the defense asked the jury to find Tex not guilty, that it wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 29 hours, after which they were deadlocked. The judge said, "Get back in there!" And 2 hours later, they had their verdict.
Welcome back. My understanding is that you all have reached a verdict.
On count 1, murder, we find the defendant not guilty. On count 2, felony murder, we find the defendant guilty of felony murder.
Pretty crazy. The jury came to the conclusion that the murder wasn't premeditated, he hadn't planned anything out, but he had intentionally shot her, harming her, killing her, which still carries a life sentence. The sentencing was held in May 2018.
The outpouring of support has been beyond anything that any of us expected. One I would like to point out is because it seems to be fairly common. It's a lady from Ireland. Her name is Diane Kenny, Dublin, Ireland.
Shit, do I know her?
And she says, "Dear Mr. McIver, you do not know me, but I watched your trial online and I wanted to write and offer you my support. The injustice done to you is shocking."
His statement was kind of bizarre, but in it he said how much he loved and missed Diane.
"On this earth, she was my life and made me complete. Certainly not that way now. But if I might just say to her directly, because I know she's here, I feel her presence as I speak these words. Darling, you have brought me more joy and fulfillment that few men on this earth have ever known. Thank you until we are together again."
But the judge saw it another way.
And this jury, along with the attorneys and Mr. McIver, and perhaps Mr. McIver's sister, really the only people, with all due respect to Ireland and Australia, etc., who absorbed all of the evidence that was presented in this case. It's helpful to have the armchair jurists who, after the fact, say this is how it should have played out or that. It was a miscarriage of justice, or it was the right answer, or this or that. What the jury said in the end was that it was not an accident. The jury concluded that you, Mr. McIver, intentionally pulled the trigger of that firearm, and they delivered a verdict that supported that conclusion. If you, in fact, love Diane McIver as much as you've just shared with me, and others have shared with me through the letters and what we heard at trial, then there really isn't a form of punishment that any judge could impose that would be more severe than the burden of knowing that you took Diane McIver from all of us. I'll tell you what's most telling. You had as much time as you wanted to share with me what you thought was important for me to hear, and I guess your audience to hear. We heard about racehorses in Australia, and Chick-fil-A, and telepathy, a brief psychoanalysis of the male ego, and ghosts. I didn't ever hear you say you're sorry for what you did. To me, that silence speaks volumes. Mr. McIver, the sentencing options are largely determined by the legislature in this case. The penalty for felony murder is life.
You believed the verdict of guilty
was accurate.
And that's the end of that one. I have difficulty wrapping my head around this one either way. I don't think either side are very convincing. In fact, I don't actually know how the prosecution convinced the jury beyond a reasonable doubt. It seems like there's very, very little to kind of go on why he would do what he did. I mean, I don't think there's enough of a, not literal, smoking gun to say that he intentionally shot and killed her. Let me know your thoughts on this case down in the usual place. Was it intentional? Was it an accident? I mean, what did he have to gain from killing her? Okay, money, but that's not terribly clear cut. And it sounds like they loved each other. It just doesn't make any sense. Any sense at all to me. How they came to one conclusion or the other. Did he just one day say, fuck this? thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to do so. I'll see you as always real soon in the next one. We'll be back to 2 videos a week next week. Take care of yourselves. Happy New Year. Mike out.